Our study focuses on the Chinese case in the context of internal migration. In the 4 decades after China adopted the reform and opening up policy in the late 1970s, the country has seen an unprecedented population transfer from its vast rural hinterland to industrial boom towns. As seen in this figure, in 1982, China's first census documented around 6.5 million rural migrants, and this figure rose to about 290 in 2019, right before the pandemic. Such unprecedented demographic transition could have shocked the well-known Chinese anthropologist Fei Xiaotong, who wrote extensively on the rural society in the 20th century, when he wrote that the rural is a society without strangers and it's a society based totally on the familiar. So we want to understand, what does the massive exodus of rural labor migrants mean for children and youth staying behind in the communities? Theoretically, there could be different perspectives. The first one, rural depopulation could be seen as a transfer of human, social, and cultural capitals to the urban areas due to the migration selectivity effect. Those who are able, who are more healthy and more educated have been moving out, which depletes the communities in the rural. This is also a mainstream view held by sympathetic Chinese intellectuals. A lot of writings have published in the past decade on this. Well, on the other hand, we could consider a different perspective. One has to take into consideration the unique institutional environment of post-reform China in understanding the relationship between the migrant population and their home communities. In the Chinese context, a hukou system, a household registration system, which ties a person's entitlements to social benefits to their registration place. For the rural migrant workers, for a long time, they are treated as permanently temporary workers rather than settlers, which forces them to straddle rural-urban societies. So out-migration is therefore part of a translocal strategy. Sorry, I can't move my screen. Yeah, in an earlier publication, I wrote about the translocal and multi-local householding strategies of these families operating across 3-tiered spaces. Sociologist He Xuefeng in China also argues that in this context, rural villages are a safety valve for peasants to retreat to in difficulties. We use the China Family Panel Studies data to empirically test which of the theory holds. We merge data from the 2010 wave of the community questionnaire as well as the child questionnaire, which were further linked with their individual, with the group of adolescents' individual data in 2018, which ended with, we ended up with 1,800 adolescents in 2010 who grew up into young adults in 2018. Our analysis proceeded in 2 steps. In the first step, we conducted latent profile analysis to understand how prevalent the rural communities are depopulated. In the second step, we try to bring multi-level factors into the analysis. Here are the measures used in this study in the multi-level analysis. For the sake of time, I would just mention that the adolescents development measures, we use two indicators here. The first one is the test score, deriving from a test that the respondents took in the interview in 2018, which was further age standardized for comparison. And also we have an indicator of respondents' educational attainment, measured by how many years they have, how many years of education they have received. At the community level, we use the measure of the percentage of out migrants among the labor force in the community as the measure of depopulation. Now I'm going to share you some of the main findings. As shown here, our latent profile analysis indicates that there are two types of rural communities across China. The former type constitutes around 93%, the absolute majority, and the second type, which we describe as the migrant receiving villages, constitutes about 7%. These two different types of communities differ significantly in different characteristics. In summary, the former type, here indicated in orange, are what we call the depopulated villages, which usually have higher percentage of migrants in the population and more of the labor force in working in agriculture, and smaller in population size, and also more distant away from the urban towns, and have a relatively lower income per capita in the village. And these characteristics fit our commonsensical understanding and popular imaginations of rural China, the remote and underdeveloped communities in the vast hinterlands of China. Whereas in the purple, those indicated in purple are the second type, which are quite different in terms of income, the distance to town center, as well as the population size and dynamics. And also they have a relatively smaller proportion of out migrants among its labor force. Now we move on to the second step of the analysis of multi-level factors. I'm going to skip the summary table here, only to emphasize that here we find gender differences, significant gender differences in the both outcomes of the educational development of these youth. For each outcome, we estimated multi-level models entering three sets of factors: demographic characteristics, early childhood and family characteristics at the level 1, and the community characteristics at the level 2. Shown here in this table, we see that 13% of the youth verbal test score lies at the community level. Entering the 3 blocks of the factors explains about 23 of the total variation in test score. Among the child demographics, we see that gender and only child status are consistently significant covariants. Among the early development and family characteristics indicators, youth counting ability in childhood, as well as their mother's education, are significant covariates. At the community level, we see a bunch of indicators having significant results in expected directions, including the distance to town center and counting the infrastructure, such as the use of tap water in cooking, and the interviewer evaluation of the community SES. I want to emphasize that here, the depopulation measure, in which we have tried different cutoff points of 50, 60, 40, 70, and we present the most stringent case here. That is 70% or more of its labor force being out migrants. As we see here from the table, this measure does not show significant results. For the
Xiaorong, yeah. Sorry if I interrupt. Okay. You've used up about 10 minutes now. So
okay, thanks. For the educational attainment, we see that 17% of the total variation in their attainment lies at the community level. Entering the three sets of factors explain a large chunk of the variation, and that is about 60%. As we see from here, different factors at the level 1 show expected results here. But I want to emphasize that contrary to our expectations, none of the community variables in our estimation yielded significant result, including the depopulation measure. Last, I want to emphasize that we, as I mentioned earlier, there's significant gender effect in the educational attainment as well as verbal score of the youth, and we also find significant interaction effects between gender and the type of community. So as you see from here, women in depopulated communities have significantly greater leads in verbal score. So the summary, in summary, we report three findings. First, rural depopulation is prevalent, and second, the community characteristics have moderate effect, but depopulation as a demographic feature shows no significant result for either outcome, and there's gender and community interaction effect. Evidence in this study suggests that a sweeping crisis discourse on depopulation and rural decline is not warranted. It is likely depopulation due to migration as a demographic trend does not equal to the loss of human and social connections of migrants with their home communities. And we may need more substantial evidence and for other outcomes, other indicators to have a better understanding of the situation.